back to the segment Expat Kids, Where Are They Now and What Are They Doing? I'm Emily, and today I'm joined by Sophia, who is based in Geneva. Is that right, Sophia? Geneva?
Yeah, in Geneva, Switzerland.
Cool. Well, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your expat childhood, and what you're doing now?
Sure. So, my dad is British, but my mum is Italian. And we moved around. I was actually born in the Caribbean, in
Oh, wow.
Barbados, and we lived in the Philippines for a little bit. But mostly I grew up in Singapore. So we were in Singapore 10, 11 years. Um, and yeah, living the expat life there. So I did most of my schooling there, and then we left just after I started university back in the UK.
Okay. So your entire childhood was spent in Singapore,
Most the important years, I'd
the
say,
important years.
yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. What's that like as you're not from Singapore, I imagine, and you spent a lot of your critical years there. How do you feel that has impacted you growing up? Did you go back home like in the summer holidays? Was it very different? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, Singapore is quite different um to Europe, but in that part of Asia is the most advanced kind of place of that part of
Mm,
Southeast Asia. So so you have this experience where sometimes you're living in the future, if you like. The technology was always much more advanced than Europe. So we would go back to Europe every year, specifically to Italy to see all my family.
yeah,
To my mum was very adamant that we grew up bilingual, so to speak the language, to meet friends, etc. And a lot of the technology that in Singapore was just normal, just sort of didn't hadn't quite reached Europe yet, if you like.
yeah.
As in there was free public Wi-Fi in Singapore before we had smartphones, before there was a real need for it.
That's
Um,
crazy. That's
so people would come with their laptops and just sort of work in sort of public areas, shopping malls, that kind of thing. Um, so you always had this comparison between the way things were happening in Singapore and the way things were happening in Europe. And also things would happen very, very quickly in Singapore, of course, because it's, you know, a small nation, an island nation,
mhm.
has a lot of money. Um, and if they decided that something was going to happen, it happened yesterday,
Right.
Whereas in Europe, things take a lot longer. There's a lot more steps to go through. Especially in Italy, you have a lot of history. So anytime you want to build something new, you have um, the threat, or I guess the possibility that you're going to dig and find Roman ruins or Etruscan
Yeah.
ruins or whatever it is. So there's a long, long process. And growing up, I could see these two things as quite different, which was fun in a way to experience them both.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you had two different cultures in your pocket, and that's always kind of it adds a richness to you, right? As a
Mhm.
person with your character and everything.
I guess so. I'd like to think that.
I like to think that as well. Um, but you were born in the Caribbean, in Barbados, you said?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. So what happened there? Were your parents just were they working there or?
Yeah, so we were always moving around for Dad's job.
Hmm.
Um, he was working for Shell,
Right.
and they had a big office in the Caribbean in Barbados. Um, and and yeah, so that was his second expatriation, and I was born there. Excuse me. And actually, just before he retired, so after Singapore, we moved back there, or they moved back there. I guess I was at university at that point.
Right.
Um, so we went back to Barbados, which was great because um, I also have a Belgian passport from when I was born there.
Yeah.
So it was really easy for me to go and to work and to enjoy a little bit of Barbados while they were there the second time around.
Right. That's so interesting. How did you find going back there as somewhat a grown person?
I mean, I didn't remember it from when I was little. We moved away quite quickly.
Mm,
We went back once, I think maybe I was 7 or 8. So I
mhm.
have a vague memory of that. Um, but going back as as sort of a young adult, um, with the freedom to work and be part of that society was fantastic. The Caribbean is again a completely different vibe, if you like, and Barbados is fantastic because, unlike a lot of the other Caribbean islands, is quite safe. So you don't have kind of many security concerns at all. It means you can really be part of the parties that are happening, the festivals that are happening. They have a fantastic carnival every year called Cropover,
Okay.
which we took part in. And just, I mean, you can't really beat the beaches there.
I can imagine.
Island life, that was real island life. Even though Singapore was an island, it wasn't. It was city life, you know, and
Yeah.
then Barbados was very much island life.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. I've never been to I've neither Singapore nor Barbados or the Caribbean, so this is
I would
really
recommend.
cool. I'm gonna take that to heart. I would love to see those kinds of places. Honestly, it's just like a whole different world for me as well. Because I also traveled around growing up, but I those are two parts of the world that that kind of fell out from my growing up from the countries I've been
Mm-hmm.
to. So I consider them, yeah, worlds apart, and I'd love
Well,
to.
there you go. This is your sign.
This
This
is
is
my
your
sign,
sign to go.
man. I'd love to. Where did you go? Where did you study?
I was in the UK in a
Hmm.
university called Durham, which is sort of in the north of the UK for my undergraduate,
Yeah.
which was a little bit of a shock because north of the UK is very cold
Yes.
and Singapore is 1 degree from the equator. So my first real winter after 10 years or so
Mm.
was in the north of the UK and it
Oh
was hard.
God, what a shock.
It
Oh my
was
God.
a shock. I honestly didn't think it would be as bad as it was. Um, so it took a little bit of getting used to. I wouldn't
Oof.
say I'm even used to winter now. I don't know. I don't know at what point in someone's growing up development you're meant to get used to temperature, but mine was definitely at around 28 to 30 degrees.
Right.
And so anything that is not 28 to 30 degrees is
Yeah.
not great.
It's just not for you.
Mhm.
You know, that's completely fair to anyone who didn't grow up in Singapore or the Caribbean, such as myself, because the north of England is just, it's far too cold for any average person.
Mhm.
And I've heard from a lot of
Mhm.
people, because I studied in England as well, but I studied in the Southwest, so I was in Exeter.
Right.
And
Nice.
that was cold because England is cold, but it was not as cold as the north. And I've heard a lot of people, I had a lot of friends who studied in Nottingham and in Durham, and they all just were like, yeah, that place is, if you think Exeter's cold, don't go up north. Because I would complain about like the humidity and the coldness in the winter and stuff, that they'd be like, you would die in Durham. And I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
it's why I'm
Mhm.
not there.
Yeah.
Jeez.
See,
But
my I had a thought process, right? Before I
mhm,
went, I had a thought process in where I applied because I thought, look, I'm on the equator right now. I'm going to the UK, which is going to be cold. So
yep,
anywhere I go, I'm going to suffer, right?
that's,
I'm going to
yeah.
have winter. So therefore, it doesn't really matter, the extent of that. I was wrong. It was an erroneous thought process. I
Feel
should have gone
like,
to London or something.
yeah, I feel like you should have
But
had a softer launch and then just went
mhm,
colder, but you went straight to you were not
I know,
joking
I know.
around.
My grandmother was Scottish, so I was hoping perhaps
Oh,
some Scottish blood would make itself
yeah.
known.
Hmm.
No, didn't happen.
No.
Not at all.
Yikes. Well, you ripped that band-aid off, so you're good now,
It's
right?
fine. It's fine. I mean, everyone else got snow days, but we didn't. Put your wellies on, trek through the snow, go to lectures. It's all good.
I am so sorry. We got snow days.
No, apart from that, yeah, right. And we saw on the news all the other universities, universities close early or whatever. And no.
Well, okay, so aside from the weather, did you have any other sort of culture shocks when you moved from, from your expat life, let's call it, um, to a less expat life, maybe we can
Mhm.
say, in Durham, in the UK, after all these years of just living abroad and stuff? Was that any different? Did you feel different or like kind of apart from your peers? That's the word.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a massive culture shock.
Yeah.
A massive culture shock because I didn't, my dad's British,
Mm.
and even in Singapore, I went to the British school. So I was following a British curriculum.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought I would be going home, if there's such a thing.
Mm. Oh,
That did
interesting.
not happen. um,
Yikes.
I was a kind of weird in between, right? Because I didn't share a lot of the um, background that a lot of the people in Durham shared, but I kind of looked like them
Yeah.
and sounded like them. Not quite. My accent was more American than it is now
Oh,
because of the
nice.
international aspect of things. Um, but you could tell that it was British-ish, right?
Mm.
And so they didn't really know what to do with me. The truly international people, the people who'd come over from China or from India or from other places that I probably would have had quite a lot more in common with, looked at me, didn't really see me
Yeah.
as one of them. Um, so so I was this kind of weird in between where I didn't quite fit in with one or the other. And I think also because we always went back to Italy in the summers and not to England, I missed out on a lot of cultural stuff that was happening,
Yeah.
during my teenage years in the UK. So I couldn't quite, it took me a little while just to understand and to connect. And also, I found that in the international circles, people come and go so quickly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you must know this. People pass through. In
Yeah.
Singapore, every 2 years, it'd be a completely different year group, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone was expat in my school. So what that meant was you figure out pretty quickly if you're going to be friends with someone or not. It's a, and usually you are because you just by being in the same place at the same time, you have enough in common to make a friendship.
Yeah.
Whereas I found at university, people would be super polite because they're British, um, which I interpreted as we're best friends.
It's a weird it's a weird energy that, right? It
Right?
throws you
And
off.
then and then you're like, but you're not kind of acting as if we're friends. Like I'm
Mm.
inviting you to all the things, but you're not inviting me to all the things.
Yep.
But you're acting as if we're really good friends. So I'm a bit confused about what's going on right now.
Yep.
So that took a little bit of getting used to. And then now I can read people in the UK really, really easily. I can tell very quickly who's being just polite or who's being genuine. But
That's a skill.
it's it was learned. It was a learned skill because people are very direct, I think, in the international community. Like you're either gonna be best friends for the 2 years that you're there,
Mm.
or you're not.
It's true. It's absolutely true. It's a lot
So
easier
that
that.
that was part of the culture shock. And then I think I had another aspect of it, which was specifically to Durham, and I think probably it would have been the same in Exeter. You have a vast amount of people who go to certain universities who have come from boarding schools
Yes. Yeah.
or um, very well known, not boarding schools, normal schools if you like, but
Yeah.
um, usually private, etc.
Yeah.
So which are called public schools. Anyway,
That's yeah, that's another weird
yeah,
thing.
leaving the
Yeah, yeah.
terminology to one side.
Hmm.
So they come from these schools and they don't feel homesick because they've been boarding for most of their life.
Yeah.
I felt very, very homesick.
Oh.
And yeah, for the first few months for sure. Um, but also there's a culture around these schools that I didn't know about. So, especially in the first few weeks when you're getting to know people and
Mm,
they ask
Freshers
you,
Week.
oh, freshers week, exactly. And they ask you, what school did you go to? And I'm thinking, you wouldn't know my school. Why are you asking me? A more legitimate question would be, what country did you grow up in or
Mm,
something for me?
that doesn't cross their
But for
mind.
them,
That doesn't.
absolutely not.
Why would they ask you that? They assume you have, well, okay, so if you say you didn't have the accent back then, but now you do, they would assume you grew up, I don't know, where they grew up, went to the school they
Well,
went to.
well, exactly. They're waiting for Eton, Harrow, Cheltenham Girls,
Lord.
these schools to come out of your mouth. And I was like, Tanglin, you that school. Um, and the name of that school, whatever school you give, means something,
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't say it created a hierarchy. I don't think it was that, nefarious or anything, but
Mhm.
it told you a lot about that person, depending on
Yes.
what school that person went to. But I didn't know any of these schools, so I was like, oh, that's nice. Where's Harrow? What?
But that's the best way to approach these people, because it's just hilarious the way they react. They're like, "Oh, I went to Eton." You're like, "Oh, never heard of it. Where's that? Was it nice?"
Yeah,
No,
where's
you don't
that?
know Eton.
Is that in the UK?
Oh, is that? Where is that?
Yeah, yeah.
It
So
drives
that was
them
that was a little bit.
crazy.
I understood that over a few months. I'm still kind of understanding some of the things. I was part of conversations where people were talking about Henley. It's like, oh, are you going to Henley this year? Everyone's going to Henley, and where do you sit when you go to Henley? And I'm thinking, oh, what's Henley? Is it a festival? Is there some sort of music? No, it's a boat race. That's what Henley is. It's a boat race that takes place in Henley upon Thames. But I had no idea. And so all of these summer things that the British do, they revolve around different sports and music. So the proms and Wimbledon, people usually
Right.
have heard of, Henley, Ascot, all of these things.
Yeah.
I didn't really, I didn't really know. So people were talking about them like the most normal thing in the world to do
Yeah.
over the summer. And I was thinking, well, I usually go sit on a beach in Sardinia over the summer.
Exactly.
What's going on?
Yeah.
So it just took me a little while to understand the culture, to understand the people. I mean, it's absolutely fine now, and after a year or so university, you get used to it
You
all.
get used to it.
But
Yeah.
it was much more of a culture shock than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. I think I think it struck me as odd that I had to put in all this effort to understand their culture. But when it came to me explaining to them my upbringing and the way I lived, it was very much they didn't really care as much, or
yeah, you're right.
they didn't put
Hmm.
in the effort to understand it. They were like, "Well, you're here now, so what are you going to do with all of this?" And it became a sort of, I don't know for you, but for me, it became a sort of blending in tool. So I had this upbringing, I had this childhood that I, for some reason, had to hide a little bit when I went to university because my peers loved them. Like I found my friends, I found my group. But the majority of people I went to university with, they didn't know what to do with my past, with my experiences, and
Hmm.
I had to kind of hide them. And I thought for a long time, I was like, this is so unfair. Like, why do I have to hide? Why do I have to feel alienated? Um, because they feel alienated, when they're like, "What school did you go to?" And they're expecting, like you
Yeah.
said, Harrow, Eton, whatever. And I'm like, "Oh, you wouldn't know it. I went to school in Rome, and before that, I lived I lived in Sudan." And they're like, "What? Oh my God." And then, oh, this is great. I told them once that I did horse riding because there was nothing else to do in Khartoum in Sudan. So there was this horse riding club, and my mom was like, "Well, why don't you try some horse riding?" So I did, and I told a friend this once, and she was like, "Horse riding? Well, you're posh, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Posh? There
The
was nothing
accent is
else
on
to do."
point, by the way.
Thank you. I practice in the mirror. But it's just like it's a completely different world. And I had to explain, like, no, I mean, there was nothing else to do in Khartoum, so I did horse riding. And she was like, only posh girls go horse riding. And you're like, okay, like
Guess I
that,
am posh then.
yes, I am posh. But then, like posh aspects in the UK, I didn't live those things. Like I've never been to Ascot, which I
Yeah.
would consider posh, or I've never been to a boat race. I wouldn't even know how to dress for that, and just like all of that I didn't live. So I don't know if you felt the same way about like having to hide sometimes your past because it just they wouldn't understand it, and then you had to work double as hard to just try to fit in. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely working hard to fit in. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily I hid it, but people just didn't know what to do with it. So
yeah,
it was kind of like they'd ask you a few polite questions and then it was the end of the conversation. Um, Usually, oh, what's Singapore like? And then I give it a couple of sentences and then we move on
Yeah,
to
yeah,
somewhere to something else. So I don't think, I mean, the friends that have ended up sticking with me since then know quite a lot about my upbringing and stuff because
yeah,
they're the ones who they kind of sit and have longer conversations, etc. But in general, people just don't know what to do with that information, you know. Whereas if you're constantly living amongst people who are moving all over the place, then you kind of even know what questions to ask. You know
yeah,
what to be curious
yeah,
about that place.
yeah, for sure.
Um, I guess they maybe benefit of the doubt. I'm thinking they didn't know where to start.
That's so
But it
true.
meant that, yeah, I had to do a lot of fitting in because the majority, especially in Durham, the vast majority of people weren't international at all.
Mm,
In other universities, you have a majority or a strong minority, if not a majority, of very international
yeah,
people. But in Durham, it's very British.
very
At least it
British.
was
Yeah,
when I did my undergraduate. Um, so yeah, I had to fit in with the crowd.
I understand. It's just some things that we have to do as international kids, I think. It's just second nature at some point.
Always.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it's time
Yeah.
to start wrapping up, I'm afraid, because this has been so interesting and I would love to keep going. But just one last question for you. What are you doing now? Where are you? Well, we know you're in Geneva, but what are you doing? What are you up to?
Mhm. So I'm working for CERN right now, which for those of you who don't know is the Center for Nuclear Research, the uh, where they have the Large Hadron Collider where you whiz particles around and collide them, and then
That
you
is so cool.
um, look at the spray of particles that are coming out of those collisions. So
Yeah.
I'm working there as a science communicator for one of the big experiments. I actually was working in tech for a while at IBM, and then decided to change tack a little bit and did a master's in science communication. And through that, came up to CERN to do an internship, and then they asked me to come back and take the job. So I'm here for at least a couple of years now. I've just started recently, and it's fun to be back in a real international community, I think.
Yeah. Is it a big international
Yeah,
community in Geneva or CERN specifically?
massive.
Wow.
Both, both.
Both.
I've met very few Swiss people, which can be good or bad. Most people are from everywhere. Um, and there are so many big international organizations within
Yes.
Geneva,
The ICRC
both
is
in the
headquartered
non-profit,
there.
precisely. So my housemates work at the ICRC,
All
and
right.
one's Chinese, one's half Spanish, half Dutch,
Hmm.
and
Good
we all
mixture.
get on great. And then you've got the WHO is here, the UN is here,
Yes, that's
CERN
right.
obviously is here, the World Economic Forum as well, and then you've got a bunch of very big companies that are also
Yeah.
in Geneva. So Procter and Gamble is based in Geneva. You've got branches of all the big consultancies and the banks. Then you've got the watchmakers who are some in Geneva, some just up in Lyon. Um, and then up the lake, on the other side of the lake, you have the Unilever headquarters. So you just have a huge amount of expats and international people who are kind of in the area.
Yeah.
It's quite fun. It's really good fun.
That's really fun to hear. I knew that obviously Geneva's headquarters for the ICRC, which is where my parents work.
Right.
So I knew it had that sort of international community, but I didn't realize it was that big. That's amazing. So do you feel
Mhm.
at home there? Do you feel like you really don't have to work too hard to fit in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just sort of, I guess, a bit like when growing up, you meet people. The fact that you are there at the same time is
Yeah,
enough
is enough. Yeah.
to make a connection with them, which I love because then you end up, hanging out with people who are completely different to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but the downside is people are here on short-term contracts and they leave already. I've only been here a few months. People have already left.
I understand. That's
It
the
is what it is.
downside. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really cool, and I love how you put it into words, the fact that when you are in international communities, just the fact that you and another person are there at the same time, that's enough to form a relationship, a friendship,
Hmm.
what have you. I love that. I never really thought of it in that way, but you've really put it into words. It's just, it's enough that you're both there at the same time. You both know it's not going to be forever. You know, it's on a temporary basis, and that brings you together. And I think that's really, really
Hmm.
cool. Um, so yeah, and with that, I think we're going to end it here. Um, thank you so much, Sophia. This was really, really cool getting to know you, hearing your story.
Nah, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so we'll see you around, and have a great time. Enjoy Geneva and enjoy work and everything. And yeah, we'll speak soon.